Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most chaotic and honestly one of the most important periods in North Carolina's history, Reconstruction. This isn't just some dry political story. It's about a revolution, a violent backlash, and a battle for the very soul of a state.
I mean, seriously, think about that question. After the Civil War, North Carolina and the rest of the South was staring this question right in the face. The old social order, the economy, the politics, it was all just shattered. Everything was up for grabs. So, with the old system totally gone, two powerful groups pop up almost immediately. And they have completely different, polar opposite ideas for what the future should look like. Let's dig into who they were. Okay, so on one side, you've got the Conservative Party. Just think of them as the old guard, right? A mix of former Whigs and Democrats who basically wanted to hit the rewind button. And on the other side, you have the brand new Republican Party, a really diverse group that was all in on the federal government's plan for Reconstruction.
So, what was the conservatives' main goal? It was this idea of returning to the status quo antebellum. And let's be clear about what this fancy Latin phrase means. It's not just about politics. It was about rebuilding a society based on white supremacy and making absolutely sure African Americans had no real power.
So who exactly made up this new Republican coalition that was such a huge threat to the old guard? Well, it was this powerful and, for a little while, totally unstoppable alliance. Let's break down who was in it. First, and this is the biggest group by far, were the freedmen. We're talking about formerly enslaved African Americans who were now citizens. And they knew, correctly, that the Republican Party was their best and really their only shot at getting real freedom and education and a chance to own land. Next up, you had native white North Carolinians who had actually been loyal to the Union during the war. Their political enemies called them scalawags. It was meant as a nasty insult, but their votes and their local connections were absolutely critical to the Republican cause. And finally, you had Northerners who moved down south after the war was over. Resentful locals gave them the nickname carpetbaggers, sneering that they could fit everything they owned in a single suitcase. But they brought money, new business ideas, and a lot of political ambition with them. Now get this, the registration of over 70,000 black voters in 1867 was, and I'm not exaggerating, a political earthquake. This huge new group of voters came out in force, exercised their new rights, and powered the Republicans to a massive, stunning victory in the 1868 elections. And this new Republican government did not waste any time. They immediately drafted a new state constitution that was, for its time, incredibly progressive. Just think about this. It set up public schools for everybody. It made the government way more democratic by saying you didn't have to own property to hold office. And it led to the election of Governor William W. Holden, along with groundbreaking black legislators like Abraham Galloway. But this new, more equal society was not going to last. The conservative backlash was fast, it was organized, and it was unbelievably violent. They were dead set on taking back power, and they were willing to do it by any means necessary. Now, the Republicans definitely didn't help themselves. Their government got tangled up in some very real corruption scandals and accusations of misspending money. The scandals around the railroads were especially bad. We're talking huge amounts of public money, and it made it look like the new government was just out to get rich. This gave their enemies the perfect opening to attack. So the conservatives launched a two-pronged attack. In public, they had a very clear political message. It was all about white supremacy, arguing that black citizens were just not fit to vote or hold office. But behind the scenes, they unleashed the Ku Klux Klan, a straight-up terrorist group whose entire purpose was to beat, torture, and murder Republicans to stop them from voting. Okay, so with the Klan running wild, the Republican legislature got desperate. They passed something called the Schaffner Act, and this was a really controversial law that gave Governor Holden some pretty extreme powers, like being able to declare martial law and send in troops to fight the Klan. And this decision sets the stage for a huge confrontation that would become the climax of the entire Reconstruction era in North Carolina. It even got its own name, the Kirk-Holden War. Things just escalated with terrifying speed. First, the Klan publicly lynched an African-American town commissioner and then murdered a white state senator. That was it for Governor Holden. He used his new powers, declared martial law, sent in troops, and they arrested over 100 men pretty much overnight. But then Holden made a critical mistake. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus for the prisoners. Okay, what does that mean? It's a fundamental legal right that says the government can't just lock you up and throw away the key. They have to bring you before a judge. By suspending it, Holden's enemies could now paint him as a dictator who was trampling on people's rights. It was a political disaster. And the political fallout was absolute. The conservatives rode this huge wave of anti-Holden anger and won the next election in a complete landslide. And what was their very first act in power? They impeached and convicted Governor Holden, making him the first governor in all of U.S. history to be thrown out of office.
Holden's removal wasn't just about one man's career. It was a massive turning point. It really marked the beginning of the end for Reconstruction in North Carolina and all the fragile hope that it stood for. Once they had full power back, the conservatives, who now just called themselves Democrats, started systematically tearing down every single one of the Republican reforms. They rewrote the Constitution to take power away from voters, they ended local elections, and they legally enforced racial segregation in every single part of life. The final nail in the coffin actually came from a shady political deal on the national stage. The 1876 presidential election was a total mess, so they made a backroom deal called the Compromise of 1877. Basically, the Republicans got to keep the White House, and in return, they agreed to pull all the federal troops out of the South for good. The protection was gone.
And this political change had huge economic consequences, too. Slavery was gone, but it was replaced by a system called sharecropping. And while it might have looked like a step up, the system was almost always rigged to trap farming families, both black and white, in a crushing cycle of debt to the landowner they could never escape.
For African Americans, the legacy was just devastating. This quote really says it all. They weren't enslaved anymore, but they were not free. That brief shining moment of political power and civil rights, it was slammed shut. And that door wouldn't be fully pried open again for almost 100 years. So yeah, the troops left in 1877, and that's the official end date in the history books. But did it really end? The fundamental questions that Reconstruction asked, questions about who gets to be a citizen, what equality really means, and the very definition of freedom, those questions never ever went away. The fight it started would echo for generations.